My mother tore up my wedding vows at the altar and tried to force me to read a sheet with vows she had secretly written to replace mine. My mother tore the paper with my wedding vows into tiny pieces right there at the altar, in front of 200 gaping guests, the priest paralyzed with shock, and my fiancé who held my trembling hands as I tried to process what was happening in what should have been the most sacred and special moment of my life. The white pieces floated through the air like perverse confetti, slowly falling onto the red carpet of the church, while Regina, my 59-year-old mother, dressed in a white gown that rivaled mine in pomp and shine, pulled from her décolletage a folded sheet that she had secretly prepared to replace the words I had written with so much love and care during months of emotional preparation. The silence in the century-old church was so deep that I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears, the fabric of my wedding dress brushing against my legs that trembled with indignation and disbelief, and especially the sound of Marcos's heavy breathing, my fiancé, who squeezed my hands with enough strength to anchor me in that surreal moment where my own mother was actively sabotaging the most important ceremony of my adult life. That Saturday morning had begun as any bride dreams her special day should begin, with golden rays of sunlight coming through the windows of the hotel where I had spent the night with my actual bridesmaids, the aroma of fresh coffee and warm croissants filling the room, and the electrifying sensation that finally, after 2 years of dating and 1 year of engagement, I was about to marry the man who had transformed my life in such a profound and positive way. I was 35, an age many considered late for a first marriage, but which for me represented enough emotional maturity to know exactly what I wanted, and especially what I would no longer tolerate in my life. Or at least that's what I believed until I discovered that I had drastically underestimated my mother's ability to transform any moment of mine into a spectacle about herself. The wedding dress I had chosen after months of careful research hung gracefully on the hanger near the window, its crystals capturing the morning light and creating small rainbows on the white walls of the room, while I took my last bath as a single woman, completely unaware that my mother was at that exact moment in the next room, rehearsing in front of the mirror the speech she had prepared to replace my personal vows. Everything had begun to show signs of trouble 6 months earlier, when I announced to my family during an apparently peaceful Sunday lunch that Marcos had proposed to me during our dating anniversary trip to a historic town in the mountains. While my father Fernando embraced Marcos with genuine paternal affection and my sister Helena screamed with joy, asking to see the engagement ring, Regina remained strangely silent in her chair at the head of the table, her cold blue eyes analyzing every detail of the scene with an expression that I had known very well since childhood. That calculating look that preceded her attempts to transform any situation into something about herself. "Well, I suppose you'll want my help organizing everything, since Clara never had much talent for important social events," she finally said, her voice loaded with that toxic mixture of condescension and criticism, disguised as an offer of help that had characterized our relationship for 3.5 decades. Marcos squeezed my hand under the table, a subtle gesture of support that he had developed during the 2 years in which he witnessed the dysfunctional dynamic between me and my mother, as I took a deep breath and responded as calmly as possible that we had already hired Luciana, a highly recommended professional wedding planner, to take care of all the details. The emotional explosion that followed my declaration of independence in organizing my own wedding was worthy of a theatrical performance of Greek tragedy, with Regina alternating between dramatic tears that stained her impeccable makeup and furious accusations that I was deliberately excluding her from the most important moment in a mother's life. A professional planner? You prefer to trust the most special day of your life to a mercenary stranger instead of your own mother who raised you, educated you, sacrificed everything for you? She shouted, rising from the table with such force that her chair fell backward with a crash, frightening the family dog that was sleeping peacefully in the corner of the dining room. My father tried to calm her with his ever-conciliatory voice, the same voice he had used for decades to try to mediate the constant conflicts between Regina and anyone who dared to contradict her. But she was already in full attack mode, listing every real or imagined sacrifice she had made for me since the moment of my conception, as if raising one's own children was an extraordinary favor that required perpetual payment in the form of absolute submission to all her whims. Helena, my sister 3 years older, who had long ago learned to navigate our mother's emotional storms through strategic agreement and geographic distance, tried to change the focus of the conversation by asking about the wedding venue, but Regina was not willing to let the subject die. "Are you at least going to let me be the maid of honor? After all, I am the most important person in Clara's life." The woman who literally brought her into the world through 36 hours of agonizing labor, she declared, completely ignoring the fact that bridesmaids are usually friends or sisters of the bride, not narcissistic 59-year-old mothers who still dressed as if they were 25 and constantly competed with their own daughters for male attention. The suggestion was so absurd that even Fernando, who normally avoided confronting Regina directly, uncomfortably cleared his throat and muttered something about traditions and appropriate roles in wedding ceremonies. But Regina had already decided that she would be my special maid of honor, and nothing nor anyone would change her determination to transform my wedding into her own personal spectacle. The following months were a constant battle between my attempts to maintain healthy boundaries and Regina's increasingly aggressive efforts to take control of every aspect of the wedding. She would show up unannounced at meetings with Luciana, contradicting every decision we had made about decoration, menu, music, and especially about the wedding dress. "That neckline is too revealing for a woman of your age, Clara. People will think you're desperate," she commented during a dress fitting for which she definitely had not been invited, having discovered the appointment time through telephone manipulation of the poor shop assistant. The dress in question had a discreet and elegant neckline that barely showed the collarbone. But for Regina, anything that wasn't a complete burqa was considered too provocative when worn by her daughters, even though she herself circulated in clothes that would be considered daring, even for women decades younger. Luciana, an experienced professional who had dealt with controlling mothers before, tried to diplomatically suggest that Regina could choose her own dress for the ceremony. But this only provoked another explosion about how I was trying to transform her into just another guest, instead of recognizing her fundamental and unique role in my life. The issue of her dress for the wedding became another battlefield when Regina announced with incomprehensible pride that she had ordered a dress appropriate for the most important mother of the bride at the event. When she finally showed the piece during another forced family lunch, Helena literally spat out the wine she was drinking. My father turned as pale as paper, and Marcos squeezed my knee so hard under the table that I'm sure he left marks. The dress was white, not off-white, not pearl, not champagne. Pure white, with lace details, a short train, and a decorative veil attached to a silver tiara. It was essentially a wedding dress for someone who wanted to get married at 59 in a ceremony where she definitely wasn't the bride. "Mom, you can't wear white at my wedding. It's a basic, universal rule that only the bride wears white." I tried to explain with the patience of someone talking to a particularly stubborn child. But Regina just laughed in that condescending way that suggested I was too pathetic to understand her genius. "Those antiquated rules are for ordinary people, darling. Besides, technically I'll be your special maid of honor, so I have special clothing rights," she replied, adjusting the tiara as if already imagining herself parading down the church aisle. The battle over the white dress extended for weeks, with Regina employing every emotional manipulation tactic in her extensive arsenal. She cried, screamed, threatened not to attend the wedding, pretended to have developed heart problems due to the stress of being rejected by her own daughter, and went so far as to call distant relatives, telling distorted versions of the situation to gain allies in her crusade for the right to wear white at my wedding. "Your cousin Beatrice said that at her wedding in Paris, the groom's mother wore a beautiful cream dress and nobody thought it was strange," she argued, conveniently omitting that cream is not white and that the groom's mother definitely wasn't wearing a veil and tiara. Marcos, who until then had tried to remain neutral in the battles between me and Regina, finally lost his patience when she showed up at our apartment at 10 on a Tuesday night, crying hysterically because I was destroying her dream of being a worthy special maid of honor. "Regina, with all due respect, this is Clara's wedding, not yours. If you can't understand that, perhaps it's better you don't attend," he said with a firmness I had never seen before, and the shock on my mother's face was so genuine that for a moment I thought she might faint right there on our sofa. After that confrontation with Marcos, Regina changed tactics, adopting what she probably considered a more subtle approach, but which in reality was just passive, aggressive manipulation in its purest form. She began calling me daily with suggestions about the wedding vows, always emphasizing how traditional vows were so much more elegant and meaningful than those modern personal statements that sound more like graduation speeches than sacred promises. When I casually mentioned that I was writing my own vows because I wanted to express specific feelings about my journey with Marcos, she sighed dramatically and said she hoped I wouldn't embarrass the family with excessively sentimental or vulgar declarations. The word vulgar in Regina's mouth applied to anything I did was particularly ironic, considering she was the person who had caused a scene at my 30th birthday by dancing on the restaurant table after drinking too much champagne. But pointing out hypocrisies had never been productive in our dysfunctional family dynamic. 3 weeks before the wedding, during what should have been a quiet tasting dinner to finalize the reception menu, Regina showed up with a folder containing what she called essential contributions to the ceremony. Inside were not only music suggestions that bizarrely included various songs about mothers and none about conjugal love, but also a 5-page document she had titled Appropriate Vows for Clara. I read the document with growing horror while Luciana tried to maintain professional composure, and Marcos squeezed my hand hard enough to cut off circulation. The vows Regina had written for me didn't mention love, partnership, or any feelings directed at Marcos. Instead, they were an elaborate ode to Regina's motherhood, thanking her for molding me into the woman who finally managed to find a man willing to marry me, and promising never to forget that my first and most important love will always be my mother. It was so narcissistic and inappropriate that even the waiter serving water stopped mid-motion, clearly uncomfortable with what he was hearing. Mom, these aren't wedding vows. I don't even know what this is, but it's definitely not something anyone would say to their fiancé at the altar. I tried to explain, but Regina was already in full defense mode, accusing me of being an ungrateful daughter who didn't recognize the literary gift she had created. I spent weeks writing this. I consulted poetry books, watched videos of royal weddings, studied ceremonial protocols. And you simply reject my work as if it were garbage? She shouted, making a scene that caused several tables to turn in our direction. Luciana, demonstrating why she was worth every penny of her fee, intervened, smoothly suggesting that perhaps Regina's beautiful sentiments could be expressed during the traditional parents' speech at the reception. But this only provoked another explosion about how I was trying to silence her and minimize her importance in the most significant event of her life. Because yes, she really was referring to my wedding as the most significant event of her life. The situation escalated drastically during the wedding week when Regina discovered through Helena, who had made the mistake of mentioning it casually, that I had chosen my 3 best friends from college as official bridesmaids and Helena as maid of honor. The phone call I received while at work finalizing projects before the honeymoon was so hysterical that my secretary thought someone had died. How could you betray me like this? Choosing strangers instead of your own mother? Women you've known for mere 15 years while I've been in your life for 35 years? Regina sobbed on the phone, completely ignoring the fact that mothers are not bridesmaids in normal weddings, and that 15 years of friendship hardly qualified my friends as strangers. I tried to explain that she would have a special role as mother of the bride, that she would be escorted by my father to a place of honor, that she would give a speech at the reception, but nothing I said penetrated her shield of narcissistic self-victimization. That's when she made the threat that should have been my definitive sign to uninvite her completely. If you don't let me be an integral part of the ceremony, I'll make sure this wedding is memorable for all the wrong reasons. At the time, I thought it was just another one of her empty dramas, her theatrical threats that never materialized into real action. Marco suggested that we seriously consider having security at the wedding specifically to manage Regina, but I still nurtured the pathetic hope that my mother, when confronted with the reality of the sacred moment, would behave with a minimum of decency and respect. Helena, who had known Regina longer and more clearly than I did, privately warned me, "Clara, she's planning something. I've known her for 38 years and I recognize that gleam in her eyes. It's the same as when she showed up at my wedding in that low, cut red dress and gave that speech about how she was too young to be a mother. In law." Helena's wedding 5 years earlier had indeed been marked by Regina's attempts to steal the spotlight, but I naively believed she wouldn't dare do something similar at a formal religious ceremony. On Thursday, before the wedding, during the rehearsal at the church, Regina showed up wearing the infamous white dress that we had explicitly forbidden, complete with veil and tiara, causing an awkward silence among everyone present. Father Antonio, a 52-year-old man with the patience of a saint, literally had to pause his explanation about the order of the procession to process what he was seeing. "Mrs. Regina, I believe there's some misunderstanding. Are you wearing a wedding dress?" he asked with diplomatic delicacy. But Regina just smiled that smile I knew so well, the smile of someone who believes they're above all social conventions and rules of etiquette. "Father, I am my daughter's special maid of honor. This is my appropriate ceremonial attire." She responded with such conviction that the poor priest looked at me for confirmation, clearly expecting there might be some exotic family tradition he wasn't aware of. "She's not a maid of honor, Father. She's just the mother of the bride. I clarified, trying to stay calm while feeling the mortified gaze of Marcos and the groomsmen. The rehearsal rapidly deteriorated when Regina physically tried to position herself beside me at the altar where the bridesmaids would stand, discreetly pushing my friend Patricia, who was politely trying to occupy her designated place. "Mom, you'll sit in the front row with Dad. That's the traditional and honorable place for parents," I explained for the 100th time. But she pretended not to hear and continued trying to reorganize the ceremonial formation to include herself. When Father Antonio kindly but firmly insisted that she needed to follow the established church protocol, Regina began to cry theatrically, claiming she was being exiled and treated like any ordinary guest at her own daughter's wedding. Fernando finally lost his patience, something extremely rare to witness, and physically escorted her out of the church, furiously whispering something about not ruining another important occasion with your dramas. The rehearsal continued without her, but the tension in the air was palpable, everyone clearly worried about what would happen the next day. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up with a feeling of apprehension that fought against my natural bridal joy. Regina's text messages started at 5 in the morning. "I hope you have reconsidered my position in the ceremony. Remember that without me you wouldn't exist. A good daughter would honor her mother appropriately." Each message more manipulative than the previous one. Helena arrived at my hotel room at 7, looking exhausted, and confessed that Regina had spent the previous night calling her hourly with increasingly elaborate plans on how to correct the ceremony. "She mentioned something about the vows, Clara. I don't know exactly what, but she was muttering about fixing your inadequate words. You need to be prepared," Helena warned while helping me with my hair. Luciana, always professional but clearly stressed, arrived with a worried expression and reported that Regina had tried to bribe the reception DJ to change the bride's entrance music to a song about mothers and daughters, fortunately without success because the DJ had integrity and had immediately reported the attempt. When the time finally came to leave the hotel for the church, I received a call from Father Antonio that froze my blood. "Clara, your mother has been here for an hour, insisting on preparing the altar. She is wearing, well, she's dressed in white again, and she's trying to rearrange the flower arrangements. What should I do?" I instructed Marcos, who was getting ready with the groomsmen at another hotel, to arrive earlier and handle the situation, knowing he was one of the few people Regina couldn't completely intimidate. I later discovered that she had tried to convince the priest that there was an ancient family tradition where the mother of the bride read special vows on behalf of her daughter, a lie so absurd that even the patient Father Antonio had to laugh. Marcos managed to convince her to sit in her designated place, but not before she made a scene about being oppressed and silenced by an authoritarian son-in-law who was stealing her little girl. When I finally entered the church, escorted by Fernando, who whispered words of encouragement and apologies for Regina's behavior, the first thing I noticed was my mother sitting in the front row, but turned completely backward, staring at the entrance instead of the altar, clearly wanting to ensure that all 200 guests saw her in her inappropriate white dress. She had even put on a veil, creating a bizarre image of a 59-year-old bride sitting in the wrong place in the church. The murmurs from the guests were audible, mixing confusion, embarrassment, and in some cases muffled laughter. I forced myself to maintain my smile and focus on Marcos, who was waiting for me at the altar with an expression that mixed love, concern, and determination not to let Regina ruin our moment. Father Antonio began the ceremony with admirable professionalism, ignoring the fact that Regina had stood up as soon as the nuptial music ended and was trying to position herself next to the bridesmaids. Everything seemed to be under relative control until the moment of the vows. When Father Antonio announced that we would make personalized vows, something we had discussed and approved with him weeks before, I saw Regina shift in her seat with visible agitation. I took the paper with my vows from the small hidden pocket that Luciana had wisely sewn into my dress, and it was at that moment that Regina abruptly stood up, walked to the altar with determination, and before anyone could react, snatched the paper from my hands and tore it into tiny pieces. The sound of paper being destroyed echoed through the silent church like gunshots, each tear a violation of the sanctity of the moment. "These vows are inadequate and shameful. I wrote the correct vows for my daughter," she declared, pulling from the neckline of her white dress a folded sheet that she tried to force into my trembling hands. Marcos stepped forward, clearly ready to physically remove Regina from the altar, but I held him back, still in shock, trying to process the fact that my own mother had just physically destroyed the words of love I had written for my future husband in front of all the important people in our lives. The silence that followed my improvisation was absolute for exactly 3 seconds, before exploding into spontaneous and emotional applause that seemed to make the ancient wooden beams of the church vibrate with divine approval. People I barely knew were standing, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of genuine admiration for having witnessed not just wedding vows, but a declaration of emotional independence that resonated with anyone who had ever faced toxic family manipulation. The sound of applause was like a collective validation that I had made the right choice in publicly confronting decades of narcissistic maternal control, transforming what could have been my greatest humiliation into my most powerful moment of psychological liberation. Regina remained frozen in place, the paper with her falsified vows trembling in her hands like dead leaves in the wind, her face alternating between shades of furious red and cadaverous white as she processed the fact that her sabotage attempt had transformed into her own spectacular public humiliation. "Can we continue with the ceremony now?" asked Father Antonio with a mixture of professional relief and genuine pastoral emotion, clearly impressed by how I had transformed chaos into catharsis. Marcos squeezed my hands with renewed strength, his brown eyes shining with a mixture of love, pride, and iron determination to protect our union from any future attempt at toxic interference. "Yes, Father, please continue. We've already wasted too much time on unnecessary distractions," I replied, deliberately not looking at Regina, who had been firmly escorted back to her seat by Fernando, whose face showed a complex mixture of shame for his wife, pride for his daughter, and relief that the worst had apparently passed. Though we all instinctively knew that Regina probably still had other narcissistic cards hidden in the sleeve of her completely inappropriate white dress. The exchange of rings should have been a moment of pure joy and romantic symbolism, but Regina managed to contaminate even this sacred ritual with her pathological need for attention. When little Tomas, our 6-year-old nephew who served as the ring bearer, began walking down the aisle with the embroidered velvet cushion carrying our rings, Regina suddenly let out a theatrical sob so loud and artificial that the child stumbled in fright, almost dropping the rings onto the polished marble floor. "My mother's heart can't bear to see my baby grow up," she proclaimed dramatically, covering her face with her hands in a gesture that would be touching if it weren't so obviously calculated to steal the focus from the moment. Several guests rolled their eyes with barely disguised irritation, and I could hear my cousin Beatrice audibly whisper, "For God's sake, someone give that woman a sedative before she strategically faints in the middle of the ceremony." Helena, demonstrating the experience of 38 years dealing with maternal dramas, discreetly positioned herself between Regina and the central aisle, physically blocking any attempt by our mother to make another dramatic entrance. "Mom, if you cause one more scene, I swear I'll tell everyone about that time in Cancun," Helena whispered, in a tone that only Regina and I, who were closest, could hear. The veiled threat worked temporarily. Regina visibly paled and quieted down, although her blue eyes continued darting around the church like those of a predator, looking for the next opportunity to attack. I didn't know what had happened in Cancun, but I mentally thanked Helena for having this card up her sleeve, even if it meant that our mother probably had even more embarrassing secrets than wearing a wedding dress to her own daughter's wedding. When Marcos gently slid the white gold ring with discreet diamonds onto my ring finger, his voice was thick with genuine emotion as he repeated the traditional words that Father Antonio recited. "With this ring, I thee wed. I promise to be faithful in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, loving and respecting you all the days of my life." The words gained additional meaning after the chaos we had just faced together. He had literally supported me in sorrow of having a narcissistic mother trying to destroy our wedding in real time. When it was my turn to place the ring on him, my hands were surprisingly steady. All the nervous trembling had disappeared, replaced by an unwavering determination to complete this ceremony and begin my married life, regardless of how many obstacles Regina tried to place in our path. "Marcos, with this ring I thee wed," I began, my voice clear and strong, echoing through the perfect acoustics of the century-old church. "I promise to be your faithful companion, your best friend, your confidant, and your protector against narcissistic mothers-in-law who wear white dresses to other people's weddings." The last part was obviously not in the traditional script, and I drew nervous but genuine laughter from several guests, including some of Regina's relatives who were clearly on my side in this family battle. Father Antonio discreetly coughed to disguise his own laughter, and Marcos had to bite his lower lip to avoid laughing openly. Regina predictably let out another dramatic moan, but was quickly silenced by Fernando, who whispered something in her ear that made her visibly shrink in her seat. Father Antonio's final blessing was especially touching, considering the emotional circus he had been forced to manage. May God bless this union with true love, infinite patience, and the wisdom to establish healthy boundaries with toxic relatives, he said, clearly improvising the last part while looking significantly in Regina's direction. May you build together a home of peace and mutual respect, free from manipulations and unnecessary drama. Several guests murmured amen with extra enthusiasm, and I could see my Aunt Beatrice discreetly giving a thumbs up in approval. It was comforting to know that despite the shame of Regina's behavior, most of those present were on our side and understood that we were victims, not perpetrators, of this family melodrama. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride, Father Antonio finally announced, and the relief in his voice was palpable. Marcos pulled me into his arms with a mixture of passion and protection, and our kiss was long, deep, and deliberately dramatic. If Regina wanted a show, we would give her a show, but it would be our show, not hers. The applause erupted again, even more enthusiastic than before, and I could hear several whistles coming from the section where Marcos's friends were seated. When we finally separated, we were both smiling like love-struck teenagers, completely lost in each other despite the chaos around us. For a moment, I completely forgot that my mother was there, dressed as a bride, probably planning her next narcissistic attack. The procession down the church aisle, which should have been our triumphant moment as a newly married couple, was almost ruined when Regina tried to stand up and follow us down the corridor, as if she were part of the wedding procession. Fernando literally had to physically hold her by the arm to stop her, and his furious whisper of, "Sit down now or I'll ask for a divorce right here," was heard by at least the first 5 rows of seats. The threat worked. Regina collapsed in her seat with a melodramatic sigh, but at least she stayed put while Marcos and I walked down the aisle to the sound of the wedding march, followed by our best men and bridesmaids, who seemed relieved that the ceremony had ended without anyone being physically assaulted or arrested for disturbing the public order. Outside the church, while guests threw rice and rose petals, I managed a moment to breathe and process what had just happened. "You were amazing in there," Marcos whispered in my ear as we posed for the official photos. "The way you improvised those vows after what she did. Clara, I fall in love with you again every day, but today was special." His words were the balm I needed after the emotional trauma of having my own mother actively trying to sabotage my wedding. "We survived, love. If we can overcome this, we can overcome anything," I replied, intertwining our fingers and raising our joined hands to show the rings gleaming under the afternoon sun. The professional photographer we had hired, an experienced man named Roberto who had probably seen all kinds of family drama in his 30-year career, approached with a carefully neutral expression. "Mrs. Clara, Mr. Marcos, shall we do the family photos now?" he asked, clearly aware of the delicate situation. "Your mother is insisting on participating in all the photos, including those that would be just of the couple." I looked over to where Regina was, still in her absurd white dress, dramatically posing against a church column as if she were the star of a magazine photo shoot. She had even put the veil back on and was holding my spare bouquet she had stolen from somewhere, creating a bizarre image of a 59-year-old bride desperate for attention. "Roberto, please take the traditional photos first. Me, Marcos, and the wedding party. Then we'll do some with the family, but I want to approve each pose beforehand," I instructed, determined to maintain some control over at least the photographic memories of this chaotic day. "And if my mother tries to position herself at the center of any photo or stand between me and Marcos, please accidentally crop her out of the image during editing." Roberto nodded with professional understanding, and I could see a small smile at the corners of his mouth. "Understood, Ms. Clara. I've had to deal with similar situations before. Leave it to me." It was comforting to know that wedding industry professionals had experience with narcissistic relatives and knew how to manage them discreetly. During the family photo session, Regina attempted various maneuvers to become the center of attention. First, she insisted on standing next to Marcos instead of Fernando, claiming that the most handsome man should escort the most elegant woman. When this was firmly denied, she tried to position herself between me and Helena, pushing my sister aside with her hip in a movement that would be comical if it weren't so pathetic. Helena, who had reached the limit of her patience, whispered something in Regina's ear that made her turn pale and immediately move to her designated position next to Fernando. I later discovered that Helena had threatened to tell everyone about the karaoke incident at Regina's 50th birthday party, apparently another skeleton in our narcissistic mother's closet. The photo that created the most controversy was when Regina insisted on a special photo of just her and me, mother and daughter on their respective bride days. as she described it. The suggestion was so absurdly narcissistic that even some relatives who normally supported her looked visibly uncomfortable. Mother, you are not a bride today. You are the mother of the bride. There's a crucial difference that you seem unable to comprehend, I said with forced calmness that concealed my desire to scream. If you want a photo of us two, it will be a normal mother-daughter photo, with you dressed inappropriately, but still as a mother, not as a bride. Regina began to protest, but was interrupted by an unexpected voice. Regina, enough. The authoritative voice came from my maternal grandmother, Dona Teresa, an 82-year-old lady who rarely raised her voice, but when she did, managed to silence an entire room. She had been quiet throughout the ceremony, observing her daughter's behavior with growing disgust. You are embarrassing not only yourself but our entire family with this ridiculous behavior. Dress like a woman your age. Behave like the mother you should be, or go home right now. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear birds singing in the nearby trees. Regina opened and closed her mouth several times, looking like a fish out of water, clearly shocked at being publicly reprimanded by her own mother. But Mama, I was just trying to make the day special for Clara, Regina weakly protested, instantly reverting to the role of petulant daughter before the family matriarch. Dona Teresa snorted with disdain. Special? You've turned your daughter's wedding into a circus. I'm ashamed to have raised such a self-centered woman devoid of common sense. If your father were alive, he would have grounded you regardless of your age. My grandmother's public reprimand was like watching a balloon slowly deflate. Regina seemed to shrink inside the white dress, her ridiculous veil now looking even more pathetic hanging on her head like an out-of-season Halloween costume. The moment was interrupted by Luciana's arrival, who discreetly called me aside. Clara, we have a situation at the reception. Your mother apparently tried to change the table arrangement to sit at the head table with you instead of the designated parents' table. The venue manager is asking how to proceed. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Luciana, please instruct the staff to physically lock in the original arrangement. If my mother tries to change anything, they have my permission to escort her off the premises. And please make sure the DJ understands that she is not authorized to take the microphone under any circumstances. Luciana nodded with professional efficiency, making notes on her tablet. The limousine ride from the church garden to the reception venue, located in a historic mansion converted into an event space, should have been a romantic and private moment for Marcos and me to enjoy as newlyweds. Instead, we spent the 20-minute journey processing the chaos we had just survived and mentally preparing for what might still come. Your grandmother was amazing, Marcos commented, pouring 2 glasses of champagne from the limousine's minibar. I've never seen Regina put in her place so effectively. I laughed for the first time in hours, a genuine laugh of relief. Grandma Teresa is the only person in the world that Regina fears. She should have come to live with us when I was a child. It would have saved me decades of therapy. You know what's saddest? I continued, nestling against Marcos's shoulder as the limousine navigated through the tree-lined streets of the city. Part of me always dreamed of one of those touching mother-daughter moments on my wedding day. You know, her helping me with the veil, sharing marriage advice, maybe crying with genuine emotion seeing me as a bride. Instead, I have a woman nearly 60 years old competing with me for attention at my own wedding, dressed in white as if it were a tasteless joke. Marcos gently kissed the top of my head. I know, love. You deserved so much better. But look at it this way. You have Helena, who is the most amazing sister anyone could ask for. You have your grandmother, who clearly loves and protects you. And now you have me, and I promise our family will be different. We arrived at the reception hall to find a small commotion at the entrance. Regina had apparently arrived before us. How she managed that, considering we left first, remains a mystery, and was arguing with the venue manager about the seating arrangement. I'm the bride's mother. I deserve to be at the main table. What kind of second-rate establishment doesn't understand basic family hierarchy? She shouted. Her white dress now slightly wrinkled and stained with what appeared to be salad dressing. Apparently, she had attacked the appetizer table while waiting. The manager, a distinguished gentleman of about 50, maintained admirable composure in the face of the verbal assault. Ms. Regina, the seating arrangement was personally approved by the bride and cannot be altered without her express authorization, he patiently explained, clearly following Luciana's instructions to the letter. Furthermore, I must inform you that any attempt to disturb the arrangements will result in your removal from the premises. Regina turned dramatically upon seeing me arrive, her face a mask of wounded maternal indignation. Clara, Tell this incompetent man that I am your mother and deserve to be by your side on this most important day." She advanced toward me with arms outstretched, clearly planning to embrace me and make an emotional scene in front of all the guests who were beginning to arrive. Marcos took a protective step in front of me, blocking Regina's advance with his body. "Regina, Clara and I need a moment to greet our guests. Please proceed to your designated table. Fernando is already there waiting." His voice was polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. Regina stopped abruptly, clearly not expecting to be physically blocked. "How dare you place yourself between a mother and her daughter?" she hissed, trying to get around him. "I'm her husband now," Marcos replied calmly. "My job is to protect her, including from family members who don't respect her boundaries." The comment was like a verbal slap, and Regina recoiled as if she had been physically struck. It was at that moment that Helena arrived, still dressed in her elegant sky blue bridesmaid dress, but now carrying what appeared to be a larger bag than she had before. "Mom, let's go. I'll accompany you to your table," she said, firmly taking Regina by the arm. "And if you cause one more scene, I swear I'll show everyone the video of your talent show at last year's family reunion." Regina visibly paled. Apparently, there was yet another embarrassing incident that Helena was using as ammunition. "This is blackmail," Regina weakly protested as she was led away. "No, Mom, this is consequence," Helena responded without missing a beat. The reception began surprisingly well, considering the chaos of the ceremony. The guests were enjoying the appetizers and cocktails. The live band we had hired was playing soft jazz, and Regina seemed temporarily contained at her table, surrounded by relatives who had clearly been instructed, probably by Dona Teresa, to keep her under control. I was finally beginning to relax, circulating among the tables with Marcos, receiving congratulations and trying to forget the earlier fiasco. Several guests discreetly expressed admiration for how I had handled the situation at the church, and some even shared their own stories of horrors with difficult relatives at weddings. Dinner was served without major incidents, although I noticed Regina trying to draw attention in various minor ways, talking too loudly, laughing exaggeratedly, and at one point attempting an impromptu toast that was quickly aborted by Fernando taking away her wine glass. The food was delicious, the service impeccable, and I was finally starting to believe that perhaps we could finish the night without any more drama. Marcos and I shared our first meal as husband and wife, feeding each other cake in a cheesy but sweet tradition that drew awes from the guests. For a moment, it was the wedding I had dreamed of. Then came time for the speeches, and my stomach tightened in anticipation. Traditionally, the bride's parents made a speech, but considering Regina's behavior so far, I was dreading what she might say if she got hold of the microphone. Helena, as maid of honor, went first, and her speech was perfect. Funny, touching, and with some subtle jabs about overcoming family obstacles that made some guests laugh knowingly. "Clara has always been the bravest sister," Helena said, looking directly at me. "Today she proved it once again, choosing true love over others' distorted expectations. Marcos, you're not just getting a wife, but a warrior. Take good care of her." When Fernando stood up to give the parents' speech, there was a visible tension in the room. Everyone was clearly expecting Regina to try something. Fernando, looking older and more tired than his 61 years, took the microphone with slightly trembling hands. "Clara, my dear daughter," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "I apologize for any embarrassment you may have suffered today. You deserved better." He paused, glancing briefly at Regina, who was visibly squirming in her chair. "But what makes me most proud is seeing the strong, independent woman you've become, despite certain difficulties. Marcos, welcome to the family. May God help you. You're going to need it." The final comment drew nervous but genuine laughter, and Fernando quickly passed the microphone before Regina could try to grab it. But she didn't give up so easily. As soon as the band started playing again, Regina stood up and marched determinedly toward the small stage where the musicians were. She whispered something to the vocalist, who looked confused and glanced in my direction, seeking confirmation. I emphatically shook my head no, but Regina had already grabbed the microphone anyway. "Attention, everyone," she announced, her voice slightly slurred, indicating she had drunk more than she should. "I have something very important to share about my daughter." The entire hall fell silent. All eyes turned to the spectacle that was about to unfold. Marcos was already getting up to intervene, but Regina was quicker. "You all saw Clara today, beautiful in her wedding dress. But did you know that when she was little, she used to say she wanted to marry me?" The bizarre statement was met with confused silence. Regina continued, oblivious to the palpable discomfort in the room. "That's right. She loved me so much she wanted to marry Mommy. And look now. She's getting married and leaving me behind. Her voice broke into a melodramatic sob. I sacrificed everything for her. My youth, my modeling career. Yes, I could have been a model. And this is how she thanks me? Relegating me to a secondary table while strangers sit at the main table? Before Regina could continue her embarrassing speech, Donna Teresa's voice cut through the hall like a whip. Regina Maria Fernandez Silva. The use of her full name made Regina freeze like a child caught misbehaving. Get down from that stage immediately or I'll come up there to get you myself. And believe me, it won't be pretty. The threat from an 82-year-old woman might have seemed comical, but everyone who knew Donna Teresa knew she was perfectly capable of following through. Regina looked around for support, but found only faces of disapproval and embarrassment. Even her siblings, who normally defended her, were hiding their faces in their hands. Slowly, like a scolded child, Regina descended from the stage. But she didn't go quietly. "You'll all regret treating a loving mother this way," she dramatically declared, accusingly pointing at the crowd. "One day, when I'm no longer here, you'll wish you had valued me more." With that, she marched toward the exit, her ridiculous white dress dragging on the floor. Fernando rose to follow her, but I stopped him with a gesture. "Let her go, Dad. Maybe it's better this way." He nodded tiredly and sat back down, looking relieved not to have to deal with another Regina drama. Regina's dramatic exit created a momentary silence in the hall, followed by a collective murmur of relief and disbelief. I remained still for a few seconds, processing the fact that my mother had finally gone, taking with her the narcissistic chaos she had tried to impose on the most important day of my life. Marcos wrapped me in his arms, and I felt the tears I had held back throughout the entire ceremony finally running down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of liberation, relief, of a strange mixture of grief for what could have been and gratitude for what finally was. "It's over," I whispered against his chest, and he hugged me tighter, kissing the top of my head with infinite tenderness. "Everyone, let's continue the celebration," Helena announced with renewed energy, grabbing the microphone that Regina had abandoned. "This is Clara and Marcos's wedding, and it deserves to be celebrated with all the joy they deserve." The guests erupted in enthusiastic applause, some even standing up to show support. Donna Teresa, my warrior grandmother of 82 years, was the first to come and hug me, her eyes moist with emotion and pride. "You were brave today, my granddaughter. Braver than I ever was with Regina. Perhaps if I had established boundaries earlier, she wouldn't have become this," she said, vaguely gesturing toward the door through which Regina had left. "But you broke the cycle. Your children, when they come, will never need to go through what you did." The mention of future children made me smile for the first time since Regina had left the hall. Marcos and I had talked extensively about how to raise our children differently, with unconditional love, but also with healthy boundaries, without the emotional manipulation and toxic narcissism that had characterized my childhood. "Grandma, thank you for everything. For defending me today, for showing me that it's okay to confront Regina," I said, hugging her tightly. She stroked my hair as she used to do when I was a child, seeking comfort from her after my mother's emotional attacks. "I will always be by your side, my dear. Always." Fernando approached hesitantly, clearly torn between relief at Regina's departure and guilt for not having gone after her. "Clara, I'm so sorry for all this. I should have been firmer with your mother years ago. I should have protected you and Helena better," he said, his voice breaking with emotion repressed for decades. I took his wrinkled hands in mine, noting how they trembled slightly. "Dad, you did the best you could. Regina is a force of nature, destructive, but still a force. No one can control a hurricane, only survive it." He hugged me then, an embrace that seemed to carry years of unspoken apologies and silent promises that things would be different from now on. The party continued with renewed energy, as if Regina's exit had released everyone from a collective tension we didn't even know we were carrying. The band played upbeat songs, guests danced with genuine abandon, and for the first time since I had woken up that morning, I allowed myself to truly enjoy my wedding. Marcos and I danced our first official dance as husband and wife to the sound of Ed Sheeran's "Perfect," a choice that now seemed ironically appropriate. Our day had been anything but perfect in the traditional sense, but somehow it had been perfect for us. A victory over narcissism and manipulation, a declaration of emotional independence. During the dance, Marcos whispered in my ear, "You know she'll probably try to come back, don't you? Regina doesn't give up easily." I nodded. already mentally preparing for future manipulation attempts. The tearful phone calls, the guilt-tripping text messages, the well-intentioned but misinformed relatives trying to mediate a reconciliation. I know, but something changed today, Marcos. I finally said no to her publicly in front of everyone. There's no going back now. He spun me gracefully, and when he pulled me back, said, "And I'll be by your side for every no you need to say from now on." Luciana approached discreetly during a break between songs. "Clara, I need to inform you that your mother tried to return about 15 minutes ago, but the venue security did not allow her entry, as per your instructions. She made a considerable scene in the parking lot, but eventually left. I felt a twinge of something. Not exactly guilt, but perhaps pity for a woman so consumed by her own narcissism that she couldn't see how much she was destroying her most important relationships. Thank you, Luciana. You've been amazing today, handling all this." She smiled professionally. "I've seen many family dramas at weddings, but I admit your mother set a new record. At least it will make a great story to tell in the future." Helena joined us, carrying 2 champagne flutes. "A toast," she said, raising her glass. "To Clara, for finally finding her voice. To Marcos, for being the partner she deserves. And to all of us, for surviving Hurricane Regina." We toasted laughing, the champagne bubbling like the lightness I finally felt in my chest. "Helena, those threats you made to Mom. Cancun, the karaoke, the talent show?" I asked curiously. Helena laughed mischievously. "Oh, dear sister, there are so many embarrassing stories about Regina that I could write a book. I kept them all as ammunition for moments like today. Works better than any logical argument with her." Around midnight, when the party was winding down and guests were starting to say goodbye, I received a text message from an unknown number. My stomach tightened when I read, "Clara, it's your mother. I had to borrow a phone because mine died. Please don't abandon me. I can change. Give me another chance. I love you more than anything in the world." I showed the message to Marcos, who immediately took my phone and blocked the number. Honeymoon, remember? 2 weeks without drama, without Regina, without manipulation, just the 2 of us. He was right. Whatever came next, I would deal with it when we returned. For now, I deserved peace. The last surprise of the night came from an unexpected source. When we were preparing to leave for the hotel where we would spend our first night as a married couple before traveling the next morning, an elegant lady of approximately 65 approached me. "Clara, my name is Beatriz. I was married to Regina's brother 20 years ago, until I divorced him because of her. My curiosity was immediately piqued. Regina systematically destroyed my marriage, manipulating my ex, husband against me, making up stories, creating constant drama. I came today because I heard you were getting married and knew she would try to do the same thing. I'm glad to see you're stronger than I was." Beatrice handed me a small card. "My number, in case you need to talk to someone who understands what it's like to deal with Regina. There's a group of us, you know. Ex, daughters, in-law, ex, friends, distant cousins, all who have been her targets over the years. You are not alone." The revelation that there literally existed an informal support group of Regina's victims would be hilarious if it weren't so sad. I thanked Beatrice and kept the card, thinking that perhaps in the future, when the wounds were less raw, I could benefit from talking with others who had survived Hurricane Regina. In the following days, during our honeymoon on a paradise island in the Caribbean, I received several contact attempts from Regina through various means: emails, Facebook messages, even an attempt to contact through the hotel where we were staying, claiming it was a family emergency. Marcos and I had agreed on a zero-tolerance policy during our trip, so all contacts were ignored or blocked. It was liberating to discover that the world didn't end when I didn't immediately respond to Regina's demands. The sun kept rising, the sea remained beautiful, and my marriage remained strong. The real test came when we returned from our honeymoon. Regina had mounted a complete defamation campaign among relatives, painting herself as the victimized mother whose ungrateful daughter had publicly humiliated her in her moment of greatest vulnerability. Some relatives bought the story, others remained neutral, and surprisingly many took my side, revealing their own negative experiences with Regina over the years. It was a valuable lesson on how narcissism eventually alienates almost everyone around, leaving the narcissist isolated in their own distorted reality. Fernando called me a week after our return. "Clara, your mother and I are separating," he announced with a mixture of sadness and relief. "Her behavior at your wedding was the last straw, but honestly, I've been considering this for years. I was just waiting for you and Helena to be established in your own lives." The news didn't surprise me, but I still felt a pang of sadness for the family we never really had a chance to be. Dad, you have my full support. It must be a difficult decision after so many years. He sighed heavily. Difficult, yes, but necessary. I deserve peace in my final years, and you deserve a father who isn't constantly mediating your mother's dramas. 6 months later, life had settled into a new normal. Regina still tried to make contact sporadically, alternating between furious attacks and melodramatic appeals, but I had become an expert at not engaging. Marcos and I were building our life together, free from the constant chaos. Helena visited me frequently, and our relationship had grown even stronger after the wedding events. Fernando, now living alone, seemed 10 years younger, the constant tension finally absent from his face. Even Donna Teresa commented that he seemed happier than she had seen him in decades. 1 year after the wedding, I received a final message from Regina that really made me stop and think. It wasn't an attack or manipulation, but something that seemed genuinely reflective. Clara, I know you won't respond, and maybe that's better. But I want you to know that I'm in therapy. Not to get you back, but to understand why I can't stop destroying everything I touch. Maybe someday I'll manage to be the mother you deserved. Or maybe not. Either way, I hope you're happy. I didn't respond, but I kept the message. Not as hope for reconciliation, but as a reminder that even the most toxic people are, deep down, human and broken in their own way. 3 years later, when I held my newborn daughter in my arms, I thought about Regina for the first time in months, not with anger or sadness, but with a fierce determination to break the cycle for good. Sophia, my little one with green eyes like mine, would never know conditional love, emotional manipulation, or the destructive narcissism that had marked my childhood. She would know healthy boundaries, unconditional love, and the security of knowing she was loved for who she was, not for what she could do for us. Marcos kissed our foreheads, and I knew we had truly won. Not against Regina specifically, but against the cycle of toxicity she represented. Today, 5 years after that chaotic wedding, I can honestly say I'm grateful for everything that happened. Not because it was easy or pleasant, but because it forced me to find my voice, establish boundaries, and choose my own well-being over the toxic expectations of others. Regina is still out there, somewhere, probably creating drama in other people's lives. But she's no longer in my life, and that absence isn't a void. It's a space filled with peace, healthy love, and the family I chose to build. And in the end, that's the greatest victory of all. Not Regina's defeat, but the building of a life where she simply doesn't matter anymore. Did you like Clara's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you right here on the screen. Click there, and I'll be waiting for you.